He bet his daughter as the price for anyone who could tame his wild horse. A millionaire showed up, bringing dark secrets from the past. You won't believe what he did to tame the horse and her heart. If you love stories and romance, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're tuning in from. Stay with us. The smell of the barn mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee in the early mornings was the first memory that Isabella kept from her childhood. At 23, she still woke before sunrise, as if her body had been shaped by the rhythms of the ranch. But it wasn't just the scents that marked her earliest memories. It was also the gentle voice of her dead mother, who had visited her dreams since she was a little girl, always whispering the same words. "Never bow to any man, my daughter. Never." She had grown up watching her father turn to stone after his wife died in childbirth. Jack Thompson had been a different man before the tragedy, or at least that's what the older ranch hands said. But Isabella only knew the hardened version of him, the one who looked at her as if she were guilty for having survived, while his wife lay in a flowered grave beneath the golden oak tree. The Sunrise Ranch was located in rural Montana, where mountains stretched like sleeping giants, and time seemed to pass more slowly. It was a large property, but one that had been facing financial difficulties in recent years. The cattle were dwindling, the pastures were losing strength, and Jack drank more and more, letting responsibilities accumulate like dust in the corners of the main house. Isabella had grown into a beautiful young woman, sun-kissed with long hair always tied in braids that her mother had taught her before dying. Her chestnut-colored eyes reflected lightning when she was crossed, and there was a fierceness in her that made the men in the region lower their gaze. But despite her exterior strength, she carried fears inside, like an unbroken colt, free on the outside but restless in spirit. Her greatest companion was Shadow, the black horse with opaque eyes that no one had ever managed to tame. He was a wild animal that had already killed 2 ranch hands and was feared as a 4-legged demon. Everyone on the ranch kept a respectful distance from the animal, but with Isabella, Shadow would calm down. She could get close, touch his muzzle, whisper words that seemed to soothe the fury that lived inside him. No one noticed this special connection, as Jack had never allowed his daughter to ride the horse. "No woman is worthy of such a valiant horse," he would always say, with that harsh tone he used to refer to her. But on full moon nights, when everyone was asleep, Isabella would sneak out and stay near the corral, watching Shadow. It was as if the two were prisoners of the same fate, waiting for a freedom that might never come. Life on the ranch followed a predictable routine, broken only by feast days, when neighboring ranchers gathered to drink whiskey, tell stories, and do business. It was on one of these nights that everything would change forever. The party was happening in the yard of the main house, with bonfires lit and old tunes echoing through the hills. The men drank and laughed loudly, talking about cattle, land, women as if they were commodities. Isabella usually hid on these occasions, but this time her father forced her to appear, saying it was high time to find a husband for her. Jack was drinking more than usual that night. His eyes were glazed and he spoke louder, gesturing with the bottle in his hand. It was when one of the neighbors, Colonel Baker, commented on Isabella's beauty and the impossibility of anyone taming Shadow. It was a provocation, but Jack, drunk and wounded in pride, responded in a way that made Isabella's blood freeze. "I'll give my virgin daughter in marriage to the man who tames my horse," he said, with a firm and cruel voice. "If he tames the horse, he tames her." Silence fell heavily over the yard. Isabella felt a knot in her throat as if she were choking. The men's gazes turned to her, some with pity, others with interest. She knew she was too beautiful not to attract attention, but she had never imagined that her own father would use her as a bargaining chip in an insane bet. Everyone knew that Shadow was impossible to tame. Therefore, at first, the bet seemed more like a cruel joke than a real possibility. For days, no man dared to enter the corral. Isabella nurtured a secret hope that it was all just a drunken provocation that would be forgotten in time. But fate had other plans. A week after the cursed bet, Isabella woke to the deafening sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air. The helicopter landed in the pasture near the main house, raising a cloud of red dust that startled the cows, and made Shadow neigh in fury. Never before had a helicopter landed on Sunrise Ranch, and the novelty brought with it a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. From the aircraft emerged a man who seemed to come from another world. Ethan Blake wore an impeccable Italian suit, though it was already dirty with dust, shiny black boots that reflected the morning sun, and dark brown hair, slicked back with gel. His shadowed beard gave his jaw an air of contained brutality, and his dark sunglasses reflected the grey sky forming on the horizon. Ethan was known in agribusiness as the man who bought failing ranches to restructure and resell to multinationals. At 35, he had built an empire based on efficiency and cold numbers. He wasn't a cruel man, but he wasn't sentimental either. Each property he acquired was transformed into spreadsheets, graphs, and profit projections. When he removed his dark glasses to greet Jack, Isabella saw his eyes for the first time. They were amber-colored, with a hidden sadness in their depths, that contrasted with his confident posture. There was something in that gaze that made her shiver, though she couldn't say exactly what. Ethan had come to negotiate the purchase of Sunrise Ranch. Jack was in debt, and purchase offers had been coming in for months. But upon learning of the bet involving Shadow and the rancher's daughter, Ethan showed an unexpected interest. It wasn't out of male vanity or desire for possession. There was something deeper, an old pain that the wild horse had awakened in his memory. As a child, Ethan's mother had been trampled to death by a horse while trying to save it from a drunken ranch hand's attack. He had grown up fearing horses, but taming them to overcome his fear. It was his way of dealing with the trauma, transforming terror into control, vulnerability into power. In Shadow, he saw not just a wild animal, but a mirror of his own internal struggle. In silence, he asked to see Isabella up close before accepting the challenge. Jack, interested in the money Ethan could bring, immediately agreed. He called his daughter, who appeared in the yard wearing a simple cotton dress, her hair tied in a single braid that fell down her back. When Ethan saw her, he felt an unexpected shiver run down his spine. She stared at him with anger, eyes wet with humiliation, posture erect and chin raised in defiance. She wasn't just beautiful, though her beauty was undeniable. There was a wild pride in her, as untamed as Shadow. It was as if she carried inside her the same contained fury as the black horse. "So you're the man who wants to win me in a bet," said Isabella, with a voice trembling with contained anger. "You must be very confident in your abilities." Ethan was silent for a moment, studying her face. There was defiance in her eyes, but also fear. Fear of being reduced to a prize, of having her destiny decided by men who saw her as property. He recognized that feeling, for he had also felt that way as a child, vulnerable to forces he couldn't control. "I didn't come here for a bet," he finally replied, with a softer voice than Isabella expected. "I came for business, but if I accept the challenge, it won't be to win you as a prize." Jack laughed, patting Ethan on the shoulder. "They all say that at first, but when they see Shadow up close, they'll understand this is no joke. That horse has the devil in him." Ethan asked to see the animal that same afternoon. He walked to the corral with firm steps, but Isabella noticed that his hands trembled slightly. When Shadow appeared, snorting and stomping his hooves on the ground, Ethan stopped and observed for long minutes. The horse was truly imposing, black as night, with defined muscles that contracted under his shiny skin. His eyes were wild, full of a fury that seemed accumulated over the years. But Ethan saw something more. He saw pain, loneliness, the same isolation that he himself carried. "I'll start tomorrow," he said simply, turning his back on the corral. That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She stood by her bedroom window, watching the starry sky and thinking about the man who had arrived by helicopter. There was something different about him, something that intrigued and frightened her at the same time. He wasn't like the other men she knew, who looked at her as if she were just a beautiful object to be conquered. For the first time since her father had made that cursed bet, Isabella felt a pang of curiosity. Who was this man? What motivated him? And why, when looking at him, did she feel something she had never experienced before? The next morning, Ethan appeared at the corral wearing simple clothes, jeans, a cotton shirt, and worn leather boots that seemed to have history. He had exchanged his impeccable suit for something more appropriate for the work that awaited him. But what surprised Isabella most was that he hadn't brought a whip, saddle, or any taming instrument. He brought only a bag of apples and a patience that seemed infinite. Jack and some ranch hands gathered at the fence to watch the spectacle. They expected to see blood, struggle, the traditional battle between man and beast. But Ethan did something completely different. He sat on the fence, opened the bag of apples and began eating one, slowly as if he had all the time in the world. Shadow snorted from the other side of the corral, raising his front hooves and striking the air with fury. His wild eyes fixed on the intruder, and he neighed as if wanting to expel that man from his territory. But Ethan didn't approach. He just observed, chewing the apple calmly, murmuring words that no one could hear. "What the hell is he doing?" grumbled Jack, impatient. "Is he going to sit there all day?" Isabella, hidden behind the trunk of an apple tree, observed everything with growing fascination. This man was completely different from the others she knew. He wasn't like her father, who, tamed by force, nor like the ranch hands who beat out of fear. He simply waited, as if he knew a secret language that no one else understood. Hours passed. The sun rose in the sky, burning the skin of the men waiting at the fence. Some gave up and returned to their tasks, but Ethan remained there, motionless, whispering to Shadow words that seemed like lullabies. Now and then, he would throw a piece of apple in the direction of the horse, which would sniff it suspiciously, but not eat it. On the second day, Ethan repeated the ritual. He sat in the same place, with the same bag of apples, the same infinite patience. But this time Shadow approached a few steps. His eyes were still wild, but there was a new curiosity there, as if he were trying to decipher the intentions of this strange man. Isabella realized that she couldn't stay away. She quickly finished her household chores and ran to her hiding place behind the apple tree. There was something hypnotic about that silent dance between man and horse, a patience that contrasted with the violent rush of the world she knew. On the third day, something changed. Ethan began to speak louder, telling Shadow stories as if he were a person. He talked about his childhood, about his mother who had died, about the fear he carried inside. His voice was hoarse, laden with emotion, and Isabella found herself listening to every word as if they were directed at her. "You're afraid too, aren't you?" Ethan said, looking directly into the horse's eyes. "Afraid of getting hurt? Afraid of trusting? I understand. I've spent my whole life afraid too, but I'm tired of living like this." Shadow snorted but didn't retreat. There was a different tension in the air, as if horse and man were recognizing each other on some deep level. Ethan threw a whole apple toward the animal, which this time sniffed it at length before taking a cautious bite. On the fourth day, the miracle happened. Ethan slowly descended from the fence with smooth movements, and Shadow allowed him to approach. The horse trembled, his contracted muscles ready to flee or attack, but he didn't move when Ethan extended his hand and gently touched his forehead. "You're beautiful," whispered Ethan, and Isabella felt something stir in her chest. There was so much tenderness in that gesture, so much understanding, that she found herself wishing to be touched that way, not with possession or desire, but with that delicate reverence he showed for the wild horse. On the fifth day, Ethan managed to pass a soft rope around Shadow's neck. The horse shuddered but didn't resist. It was as if he had made an internal decision, a surrender that didn't mean defeat, but choice. The ranch hands, who still followed the process, were open-mouthed. Jack drank more and more, nervous about the possibility of having to keep his word. But Ethan wasn't concerned about the bet. He was creating something new, a connection that transcended simple domination. When he finally mounted Shadow, the horse neighed and reared, trying to throw him off. But there were no blows, only calm and firm commands. Ethan held on firmly, but without violence, whispering words of encouragement that seemed to calm the animal's fury. Finally, Shadow quieted, surrendering not to force, but to patience. His breathing was heavy, but there was a new peace in his eyes. Ethan led him on a slow turn around the corral, and the two seemed to dance together, man and horse in harmony. The entire ranch applauded when Ethan dismounted. Jack, drunk with pride and fear, shouted, "Now take my daughter to your bed, she's yours by right." But Ethan turned to Isabella, who had come out of hiding and was standing at the edge of the corral, her heart racing. His amber eyes met hers, and he said, with a voice hoarse with emotion, "I only want her if she wants me. I didn't come here for a bet." Isabella trembled inside and out, feeling fear, repulsion, curiosity, and something else she couldn't name. For the first time in her life, a man looked at her as if she were more than a prize to be won. That night, Isabella cried silently in the small room she had occupied since she was a child. Ethan's words echoed in her mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. "I only want her if she wants me." No man had ever said anything like that to her. No man had ever asked what she wanted. As the wind rattled the old tiles of the main house, she heard again the voice of her dead mother visiting her. Dreams. "Taming isn't about restraining, my daughter. It's about liberating." The words came as a gentle whisper, carrying a meaning that Isabella still couldn't fully comprehend. The next morning, she rose determined to discover more about the man who had tamed Shadow without violence. She sought out Mrs. Betty, the oldest cook on the ranch, who knew all the secrets and stories of the region. The woman was preparing breakfast when Isabella approached. "Mrs. Betty, do you remember a boy who came here many years ago? Son of a businessman who traded cattle with Daddy." The cook stopped stirring the pot and looked at Isabella with curiosity. "What boy, my child? So many have come over the years." "A little boy who got sick, had a high fever and needed to stay here for a few days." Mrs. Betty's eyes lit up with the memory. "Oh yes, the boy Ethan, what a suffering child, my God. He arrived here so skinny, so frightened. His father was a hard man, barely looked at his son. It was your mother who cared for him when the fever rose." Isabella felt her heart race. "My mother?" Of course it was. Mrs. Sarah was an angel on earth. She spent 3 nights awake, giving the boy lukewarm baths, making herbal tea, singing those old tunes she knew. The little boy cried softly, calling for his mother, but Mrs. Sarah cradled him as if he were her own son. Tears began to run down Isabella's face. She finally understood the sadness hidden in Ethan's amber eyes, the strange familiarity she had felt when she saw him for the first time. He had known her mother, had been touched by that infinite kindness that she could only imagine through dreams. "Does he remember her?" she asked with a trembling voice. "How could he not? It was the only time I saw that boy smiling. When the fever passed, he didn't want to leave. He kept following your mother around the house, helping with chores, as if he wanted to be adopted. But his father was in a hurry, had business to take care of. He took the boy away and they never came back." Isabella left the kitchen with her head spinning. Everything made sense now. The way Ethan looked at her, the gentleness with which he had treated Shadow, the emotion-laden words he had directed at the horse. He had returned not only for business, but for a deep connection with this place, with the memories of the only person who had treated him with unconditional love. During the day, she observed Ethan from a distance. He continued visiting Shadow, but now the two seemed like old friends. The horse would rest his muzzle on his shoulder, and Ethan would caress him with the same tenderness he had demonstrated since the first day. There was something magical about that connection, something that went beyond simple domination. In Tame. The late afternoon, Ethan found her near her mother's grave beneath the golden oak tree. Isabella was kneeling, arranging the flowers she always placed there when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw him standing a few meters away, with his hat in his hand and a respectful expression. "May I approach?" he asked softly. Isabella nodded, and he knelt beside her. For a few minutes they remained in silence, observing the simple headstone that carried only the name Sarah Thompson and the dates of birth and death. "She saved my life," Ethan finally said, with a voice laden with emotion. "Not just from the fever, she saved my soul. She was the first person who showed me that the world could be gentle." "I didn't know her," replied Isabella, wiping away the tears that insisted on falling. She died when I was born, but she visits me in dreams, whispers things that only now I'm beginning to understand. Ethan looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. You're just like her. You have the same strength, the same gentleness. When I saw you for the first time, I thought I was seeing a ghost. Is that why you accepted the bet? Because of my mother. I accepted because I saw in shadow the same pain I carry, and because I knew your mother wouldn't approve of you being treated as a betting prize. I came here to honor her memory. Isabella felt something break inside her chest. It was as if a wall she had built over the years collapsed all at once. Here was a man who had known her mother, who kept memories of her that Isabella would never have. And more than that, here was someone who saw her as more than a beautiful object to be conquered. "What do you want from me?" she asked with a barely audible voice. Ethan extended his hand and gently touched her face, wiping away a tear. "I want to know you. I want to know who Isabella is behind all this strength. I want to hear your voice, your stories, your dreams, not as a prize, but as a choice." For the first time since Ethan had arrived at the ranch, Isabella felt something she had never experienced before. The possibility of being loved for who she really was, not for what she represented. It was a terrifying and wonderful sensation at the same time. When they stood up to return to the house, Ethan held her hand with delicacy. It was a simple gesture, but filled with promises. And for the first time, Isabella allowed someone to touch her, without fear, without anger, without resistance. The golden oak tree swayed gently in the wind, as if her dead mother were blessing this new moment, this possibility of love that was beginning to bloom over her grave. The following days brought a subtle but noticeable change in the atmosphere of the ranch. Ethan prolonged his stay, claiming he was still evaluating the details of the property, but Isabella knew there was something more. He sought her out with glances during meals, found excuses to pass by the places where she worked, and whenever they crossed paths, there was a tension in the air that made her heart race. Jack, in turn, oscillated between pride at having a rich man interested in his daughter and irritation at the delay in business. He drank more than usual and made increasingly crude comments about when Ethan would finally take possession of Isabella. Her father's words made her shudder with disgust and revolt. One afternoon, while Ethan examined the ranch documents on the porch of the main house, a second helicopter landed in the same place as the first. From it emerged a tall, elegant man, wearing an impeccable grey suit, but who carried in his eyes a coldness that made Isabella feel an unpleasant shiver. It was Ryan Vance, Ethan's partner in the land acquisition business. At 40, he had built his fortune through methods that weren't always ethical, and he didn't hide his impatience with what he considered sentimentality in business. "Ethan, what's with the delay?" said Ryan, climbing the porch steps with firm steps. "We have other buyers interested in the property. We can't be wasting time with—" His sentence died in his throat when he saw Isabella passing by with a tray of coffee. His eyes fixed on the young woman with an intensity that made her want to hide. It was a completely different look from Ethan's, devoid of respect or delicacy. Ryan observed her as if she were a rare object he had just discovered, evaluating every curve of her body with a hunger he didn't try to disguise. "Now I understand the delay," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The local merchandise is interesting." Ethan rose from his chair abruptly, his fists clenched. "Watch your words, Ryan. Isabella is not merchandise." "Of course not," replied his partner, without taking his eyes off the young woman. "On the contrary, she seems to be a unique, rare piece, and you know how I appreciate rarities." Isabella felt a chill in her stomach. There was something in Ryan's voice that reminded her of childhood nightmares when she dreamed of wolves surrounding the house. She finished serving the coffee in silence and quickly left, but she could feel his gaze burning into her back. Ethan spent the rest of the day tense, arguing with Ryan about deadlines and contracts. Isabella, from her usual hiding place, heard fragments of the conversation that made her increasingly worried. Ryan wasn't interested only in the ranch business. He was interested in her. "You're losing focus," Ryan was saying, with a calculating voice. "We're here to make money, not to play knight in shining armor. If the local girl is causing a distraction, maybe it's time to Resolve the situation." "There's no situation to resolve," replied Ethan, but his voice sounded less firm than usual. "No? Then why are we still here? Why haven't you closed the deal and moved on to the next property?" Ethan was silent, and Isabella felt that he too was fighting against something inside himself. There was an invisible war happening, and she was at the center of it without fully understanding the rules. That night during dinner, Ryan made a point of sitting next to Isabella, ignoring Ethan's furious glances. He chatted with Jack about business, praised the food, but his hands always found an excuse to brush against her arm or shoulder. "Your daughter is a very special young woman," he said to Jack, as his hand possessively rested on Isabella's knee. "I'm sure she would be quite successful in the big city." "She's not going anywhere," replied Ethan, with a dangerously low voice. "No? I thought you had already earned that right," retorted Ryan, with a provocative smile. "Or has the bet not been consummated yet?" Isabella felt nauseous. The way Ryan talked about her, as if she were a business transaction, made her want to run far away. But she also felt a growing anger, the same she saw in Shadow's eyes when he felt threatened. After dinner, Ryan asked to see the property. Jack, already quite drunk, said that Isabella should accompany them, showing the barns and corrals. Ethan tried to protest, but Ryan insisted, claiming he wanted a feminine perspective on the ranch. They walked, the paths that Isabella had known since she was a little girl, but Ryan's presence transformed everything into dangerous territory. He asked seemingly innocent questions, but his intentions were clear. He wanted to know about her routine, about the places where she usually stayed alone, about the times when there was no one around. When they reached the most distant barn, Ryan asked to see the interior. It was a dark place, used to store old equipment, and Isabella hesitated. Something in her instincts screamed danger, but before she could refuse, Ryan was already pushing her inside. "Finally alone," he said, blocking the exit. "We can talk with more intimacy." Isabella backed away, her heart racing. "We have nothing to talk about. Let's go back." "Calm down, beautiful. You don't need to be afraid. I'm a generous man, and you interest me very much. I can offer things that your businessman boyfriend could never give." She tried to get past him, but Ryan grabbed her arm forcefully, his fingers digging into her delicate skin. "You don't understand how lucky you are. I'm much richer than Ethan, much more powerful, and unlike him, I don't have sentimental scruples." "Let me go!" shouted Isabella, trying to break free, but Ryan was stronger. "No one will hear you here," he whispered, bringing his face closer to hers. "And even if they hear, who would believe the word of a country girl against mine?" That's when Ethan appeared at the barn door, his eyes blazing with fury. "Take your hands off her now." Ryan smiled but didn't release Isabella. "You arrived just in time, partner. I was just explaining to your friend how business works in the real world." Ethan advanced like a wounded animal, striking Ryan with a force that made him release Isabella and fall to the ground. The two men grappled in the middle of the dark barn, and Isabella saw in Ethan a violence she had never imagined existed. He hit Ryan with his fists, with rage, with desperation, as if he were fighting against all the demons of his past. "Never touch her again," shouted Ethan, hitting until Ryan bled. "Never again." When he finally stopped, panting and with injured hands, Ryan was on the ground, moaning. Ethan turned to Isabella, who was huddled against the wall, and she saw tears running down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, kneeling on the ground. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I swore I would never be like my father, never be violent, but when I saw him touching you—" Isabella slowly approached and knelt beside him. For the first time, it was she who touched his face, wiping away the tears with trembling fingers. "You're not like your father," she said softly. "You protected me." In that moment in the dark barn, something changed between them. It was as if an invisible bridge had been built, connecting their souls through shared pain and fear. Ryan left that very night, taken in haste to a hospital, in town after Ethan threatened to call the police if he didn't immediately leave the ranch. Before departing, still bloodied and with wounded pride, he shouted words that echoed in the air like a curse. This won't end here, Ethan. You'll regret choosing a country girl over business. Jack, who had watched the whole scene too drunk to react, mumbled some confused words about city men and unnecessary problems before staggering into the house. Isabella and Ethan were left alone in the yard, under a starry sky that seemed to witness the moment of transformation between them. "He'll be back," said Isabella, breaking the silence. "Men like him always come back." Ethan nodded, running his hand through his hair. "I know, and when he returns he won't be alone. Ryan has connections, influence. He can make our lives hell." "Our lives?" she asked, with an almost inaudible voice. Ethan looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "I'm sorry, I have no right to speak like that. You don't owe me anything. You don't need to get involved in my problems." "And if I want to get involved?" The words left Isabella's mouth before she could censor them. There was something in the vulnerability that Ethan had shown, in the way he had cried after protecting her, that awakened feelings in her she couldn't name. It wasn't just gratitude or compassion. It was something deeper, more dangerous. Ethan approached slowly, as he had done with Shadow in the first days. "You don't know what you're saying. You don't really know me. You don't know what I'm capable of when I lose control. I know that you tamed Shadow without violence. I know that you met my mother and keep memories of her that I will never have. I know that you protected me when you could have just pretended not to see, and I know that there's a sadness in you that I recognize because I live with the same sadness." He stopped a few inches from her, so close that she could feel the heat of his body, the smell of his skin mixed with the perfume of the night. "Isabella." "No," she interrupted him, raising her hand. "Let me speak. I've spent my entire life hearing men decide for me. My father, who bet me as if I were cattle. Ryan, who wanted to touch me as if I were his property. You're the first one who asks what I want, so I'll tell you." Ethan waited, breath suspended. "I want to know you too. I want to know why you cry when you think of your mother. I want to understand where this gentleness you have with wounded creatures comes from. I want—" She hesitated, blushing. "I want to know what it's like to be touched by someone who sees me as a person, not as a prize." That night, for the first time since he had arrived at the ranch, Isabella made her own decision. After Ethan retired to the guest room, she waited for the house to fall completely asleep. Then, with her heart hammering in her chest, she left her room and walked through the dark corridors until she stopped in front of his door. She knocked softly, 3 almost inaudible taps. Ethan opened the door wearing only jeans, his bare chest revealing scars that told stories of a difficult life. When he saw her there, standing in the corridor with a simple white cotton nightgown, his eyes filled with surprise and something more. "Isabella? Did something happen?" She entered the room without being invited, closing the door behind her. The room was simple, illuminated only by the moonlight entering through the curtainless window. Ethan didn't move, just observed her with a reverence that made her feel powerful for the first time in her life. "You said you only wanted me if I wanted you," she whispered, her voice trembling with nervousness and determination. "Well, I want you. Not as a betting prize, not as an obligation. I want you because I chose to." Ethan remained motionless for a moment, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then, slowly, he approached her, raising his hands to touch her face with the same delicacy he used with Shadow. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Because if we're together tonight, it won't be just one night. It will mean that we're choosing each other, with all the consequences that may bring." Isabella closed her eyes and leaned her face into his palms. "I'm sure. For the first time in my life, I'm sure of something." Ethan kissed her then, first softly, then with a contained hunger that made the world spin around them. It was different from anything Isabella had imagined. There was no rush, no brutality. It was as if he were discovering every inch of her, with the patience of an explorer finding a treasure. When his hands touched her skin, Isabella felt something awaken in her body that she didn't know existed. It was as if she had lived her entire life asleep and was finally waking up. Ethan whispered her name like a prayer, and she responded with low moans that came from somewhere deep in her soul. They made love slowly, as if they had all the time in the world, as if that moment were eternal. Ethan cried when she gave herself completely to him, not from pain but from immense gratitude for having found something he thought didn't exist. And Isabella discovered that love could be both gentle and strong at the same time, that it could be both surrender and conquest simultaneously. Afterward, lying together in the narrow bed, with the moon illuminating their intertwined bodies, Isabella heard again her mother's voice in her dreams. Taming isn't about restraining, my daughter. It's about liberating. And she finally understood what those words meant. What happens now? She asked, drawing lazy circles on his chest with her finger. Ethan held her hand, intertwining their fingers. Now we face together whatever comes. Ryan, your father, the whole world if necessary, because tonight you became my choice and I became yours. Outside, Shadow neighed softly in the corral, as if greeting the freedom that had just been born. And for the first time since he had arrived at the ranch, Ethan smiled a complete smile, with no sadness hidden in the depths of his amber eyes. Isabella had tamed the tamer, and the two discovered that true love wasn't about control, but about mutual choice, about two wounded souls who decided to heal together. The days that followed passed like a golden dream. Isabella and Ethan tried to maintain appearances during the day, but their eyes met constantly, carrying a new intimacy that made them blush. At night she visited his room, and together they discovered a passion that grew with each encounter. Ethan touched her as if she were made of silk and porcelain, and Isabella learned that her body was capable of feeling pleasures she had never imagined existed. Jack, immersed in his constant drinking, didn't notice the change in his daughter, but Mrs. Betty, with her wisdom as an experienced woman, noticed the new sparkle in Isabella's eyes, the way she hummed while working, the happiness that radiated from her skin. The cook simply smiled and murmured, "That's good, my child, your mother would be happy." Ethan had cancelled all his commitments in Denver, inventing excuses for the other partners about complications in the documentation of the ranch. In truth, he couldn't imagine being away from Isabella. For the first time in his life, business had lost importance in the face of something greater. But their happiness didn't go unnoticed by everyone. One morning, while Ethan was reviewing the ranch papers, he received a call that made the blood freeze in his veins. It was Ryan, and his voice carried a dangerous coldness. "I hope you've enjoyed your honeymoon, partner," said Ryan, with an audible smile in his voice. "Because now we're back to business. Ryan, you should be in a hospital. What do you want?" "I want what I've always wanted, profit, and you're costing our company a lot. 3 weeks on a miserable ranch because of a country girl? This isn't the Ethan Blake I know." Ethan clenched his fists. "My personal life is none of your business." "Oh, but it is. Especially when your personal life interferes with our business. You know we have contracts with multinationals waiting. They won't accept delays because of your sentimental whims." "What do you want, Ryan?" "I want you to finish what you came to do. Buy the ranch, get rid of the girl, and come back to Denver today. And if I refuse?" Ryan's laugh was ice cold. "You won't refuse, because I have some interesting information about the ranch's financial situation. It seems he owes money to some very dangerous people. It would be a shame if those people discovered where to find him, wouldn't it?" Ethan felt the ground collapse beneath his feet. "You wouldn't do that." "I would, and much more. I have contacts throughout the countryside, Ethan. I can make these people's lives hell. I can make them lose the ranch, be expelled from the region, not get work anywhere. I can—" "All right," interrupted Ethan, his voice broken. "All right, you win." "Good. I expect you in Denver tomorrow. And Ethan, don't try to be clever. I have eyes in the region. If you don't show up, the girl and her father will suffer the consequences." The call ended, leaving Ethan alone with his despair. For the first time since childhood, he cried like a child, knowing he would have to destroy the only good thing he had found in life. Isabella found him like this, huddled on the porch of the main house, his face in his hands. She approached slowly, with the same gentleness he used with her, and touched his shoulder. "What happened?" Ethan raised his tear-filled eyes and saw in her all the happiness he was about to destroy. "I have to leave. Today." "Leave? But why?" "I thought "You thought wrong," he said, forcing a hardness in his voice that he didn't feel. "This was just a distraction. I have serious business to take care of." Isabella recoiled as if she had been slapped. "Distraction? Is that what I was to you? A distraction?" Ethan stood up, turned his back on her. If he looked into her eyes, he wouldn't be able to continue the lie. "You're a beautiful girl, Isabella, but I'm a businessman. I can't waste any more time here." "You're lying," she said with a trembling voice. "I don't know why, but you're lying. The man who touched me last night wasn't pretending. The man who cried in my arms wasn't pretending." "You're very naive," replied Ethan, each word cutting his own soul. "Did you think a city man would fall in love with a country girl? You were just a conquest, a pastime." Isabella felt as if the world were collapsing. The pain in her chest was so intense she could barely breathe. "No, I don't believe you." "But you should," said Ethan, finally turning to her. "I've already closed the purchase of the ranch with your father." He signed the papers yesterday while you were distracting yourself with me. You have a week to leave here. The lie was cruel but necessary. Ethan knew that if Isabella believed he loved her, she would try to follow him, and that would put her in danger. Ryan wasn't a man to make empty threats. Isabella stared at him for a long moment, looking for traces of the man she had known. But the mask that Ethan had put on was perfect, forged by years of tough negotiations and business decisions. "You're just like all the others," she finally said, with a voice she didn't recognize as her own. "Just like my father, just like Ryan. You see women as objects to use and discard." "Exactly," lied Ethan, dying inside. "Now you understand." Isabella took a step back, then another. Her eyes were dry, but Ethan could see the storm forming inside them. "Get out of my house, now." "With pleasure," he said, picking up the bag he had already prepared. "My helicopter arrives in an hour." When Ethan left the porch, Isabella collapsed, in the chair where she had so often seen him sitting, studying the ranch papers. His scent was still in it. The air mixed with the perfume of the flowers she herself had planted. Everything seemed unreal, as if the last days had been just a beautiful dream that had just turned into a nightmare. From the corral, Shadow neighed softly, as if he felt the pain that hung in the air. And for the first time since her mother had died, Isabella didn't hear her voice in her dreams. She was completely alone, with a broken heart and a ranch that would no longer be hers. But deep in her soul, a small flame of revolt began to ignite. Isabella Thompson had been touched by true love, had tasted what it was like to be seen as a woman, not as property. And no matter what Ethan said, no matter how many lies he told, she knew that what they had was real. Now she needed to discover why he was lying and fight for the truth they had lived together. 3 months passed since Ethan left the ranch, leaving Isabella with a shattered heart and an anger that grew each day. Jack, surprisingly, hadn't sold the property. When she questioned him about the papers that Ethan had supposedly signed, her father just shook his head, confused, saying he didn't remember signing anything. "Must have been the alcohol," he muttered, running his hand through his graying beard. "I've been drinking too much lately." Isabella then realized that Ethan had also lied about selling the ranch. Another lie in a pile of lies that made no sense. Why would a man in love invent such cruel stories? Why would someone who had touched her with such tenderness treat her like a disposable object? The nights were the worst. Alone in her room, Isabella relived every intimate moment they had shared, every whispered word, every caress. She knew none of it had been pretense. The body didn't lie, the moans didn't lie, the tears Ethan had shed weren't those of a man who was just having fun. She decided to investigate. Using the ranch's old computer, which only worked when it rained, she researched Ethan Blake. She found dozens of articles about his business, photos in economic newspapers, interviews where he talked about acquisitions and restructurings. But she also found something that made her stop breathing. An article from 3 months ago, published a few days after Ethan left the ranch, talked about a business fight. Businessman Ethan Blake breaks partnership with Ryan Vance after disagreements. About negotiation methods, said the headline. The article mentioned that Ethan had given up on several acquisitions and was restructuring his company alone. Isabella read and reread the article, her heart racing. Ethan had broken with Ryan. He had given up on business deals. He had completely changed his way of working after leaving the ranch. Why? The answer came on a rainy afternoon when Mrs. Betty came home agitated, returning from town. "My child, you need to know something. Your Ethan is in town." "He's not my Ethan," Isabella automatically replied, but she felt her stomach contract. "And what do you mean he's in town?" "He's been at the hotel for a week. They say he's been asking about the ranch, about you. Seems he's not well, thin, bearded, looking like he hasn't slept." Isabella feigned indifference, but her heart was beating erratically. "I'm not interested in what he does or doesn't do." "Girl, you may fool me, but you can't fool yourself. I saw how you were after he left. I saw how you cry in secret. If this man has returned, he must have a reason." That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She left the house before dawn and saddled one of the gentler horses. She didn't have the courage to ride Shadow, who had remained melancholy since Ethan's departure. She rode to town, a 2-hour journey that she made in silence, trying to prepare her heart for what she might find. The hotel was the best in town, which wasn't saying much. Isabella tied up the horse and entered the small lobby, her heart pounding. She asked to speak with Ethan Blake, and the receptionist, a curious woman who knew all the inhabitants of the region, pointed to the hotel bar. "He's been there for hours, miss. Since he arrived, he's barely left his room or the bar." Isabella saw him before he saw her. He was sitting at a corner table with a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring into nothingness. He had lost a lot of weight, his beard was unshaven, and his eyes had a sadness that she recognized because it was the same that she carried. He wore a wrinkled shirt and jeans, far from the elegance he had shown when he arrived at the ranch. When Ethan finally raised his eyes and saw her, the glass slipped from his hands, shattering on the floor. "Isabella." "Ethan," she replied with the firmest voice she could muster. "I heard you're in town. I came to find out what you want." He stood up, staggering, and she realized he had been drinking heavily. You came. I can't believe you came." "I didn't come for you," she lied. "I came because I want answers. I want to know why you lied about selling the ranch. I want to know why you lied about your feelings. I want to know why you're here drinking like a loser, if I was just a distraction." Ethan approached, and she could see tears forming in his eyes. "Isabella, No," she interrupted him, raising her hand. "First, you're going to listen to me. I spent 3 months feeling used, humiliated, stupid. I spent 3 months believing that everything we lived was a lie. But I started investigating, Ethan. I discovered that you broke with Ryan. I discovered that you changed your way of working. I discovered that you're not the cold man you pretended to be when you left." Ethan collapsed in the chair, his hands trembling. "You don't understand. He threatened you, threatened your father. Said he would make you suffer if I didn't leave. I had no choice." "What threats?" "Ryan discovered that Jack owes money to loan sharks. He said he could turn your father over to them. Said he could make your lives hell. I couldn't let that happen." Isabella felt the world spin. "So you hurt me to protect me?" "I tried to protect you," whispered Ethan, "but I destroyed myself in the process. I don't sleep, I don't eat, I can't work. I live thinking about you, about what we did together, about what I threw away." "And why are you here now?" Ethan raised his eyes, and she saw in them a new determination. "Because I can't stand living without you anymore. Because I realize that I prefer to face Ryan and all the consequences than spend the rest of my life pretending that I don't love you. Because I came to ask for your forgiveness and, if you'll let me, to ask you to run away with me." "Run away?" "Far. Away, where Ryan can't reach us. I sold everything I had, Isabella. My company, my assets, everything. I have enough money for us to start a new life. Anywhere you choose." Isabella was silent, processing everything she had heard. The anger began to give way to a painful understanding. Ethan had lied, yes, but to protect her. He had left, yes, but to save her. And now he was there, shattered, offering everything he had to start over with her. "You're an idiot," she finally said, and Ethan lowered his head, expecting rejection. An idiot who should have trusted me from the beginning, who should have told me about the threats, let me choose if I wanted to take the risk. Isabella, But you're also the man I love, she continued, and saw his eyes light up. The man who tamed Shadow with patience, who honored my mother's memory, who showed me what it's like to be truly loved. And if you think I'm going to let Ryan or any other man decide our fate, you don't know me well. Ethan stood up, approached slowly. Do you forgive me? I forgive you, she said, touching his bearded face, but with one condition. Never make decisions for me again. Never protect me by lying. If we're going to face problems, we'll face them together. He pulled her into his arms, and the kiss they shared was desperate, loaded with 3 months of longing and pain. There, in the small bar of a country hotel, they found each other again, and Isabella knew that no matter what Ryan or the whole world did, she and Ethan would write their own destiny. Isabella and Ethan spent the night at the hotel, planning their future together. He had bought a small property in northern Wyoming, far from Ryan's influences, where they could start over raising horses. It was a simple dream, but loaded with meaning for both. For the first time in months, Isabella saw hope in Ethan's amber eyes. Let's get your things from the ranch, he said, caressing her hair. And your father? Will he want to come with us? Isabella sighed. Dad is sick, Ethan. He drinks too much, and his heart can't take it anymore. I don't know if he would. Survive a move. Then we'll take care of him here. I can pay off his debts, arrange treatment. It doesn't have to be forever, but until he recovers. She kissed him with gratitude. This was the Ethan she had fallen in love with, the man who thought of solutions, who took care of those he loved, who saw people where others saw only problems. They returned to the ranch together, riding slowly along the dirt road, talking about plans and dreams. Isabella felt as if she were being reborn, as if the last 3 months of pain had been just a nightmare from which she had finally awakened. But when they reached Sunrise Ranch, they found a scene that made Ethan's blood freeze. 2 black cars were parked in front of the main house, and men in suits circled the yard like vultures. Ryan was there talking with Jack, who seemed more sober than he had been in months, but also more frightened. Damn, muttered Ethan. He found out I'm here. Who are these men? Collectors. Ryan must have turned your father over to the loan sharks. Isabella felt a cold fury take hold of her. So that's what he wanted from the beginning. They weren't just threats. They dismounted and walked toward the group. Ryan smiled when he saw them, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ethan, what a surprise to find you here again, and accompanied by the beautiful Isabella. Ryan, replied Ethan with a controlled voice. What are you doing here? Just helping a friend in difficulties, said Ryan, pointing to Jack. It seems that Mr. Thompson has some pending debts, $40,000 to be exact, with interest, of course. Jack was pale, trembling. I didn't know it. Had gotten so bad, they said if I didn't pay today. Today what? Asked Isabella, approaching her father. One of the men in suits, apparently the leader, responded with a cold voice. Today we execute the guarantee. The ranch was given as collateral. If there's no payment, we take possession immediately. That's illegal, protested Ethan. You can't take the property like that. Yes, they can, said Ryan, displaying papers. All very well documented. Mr. Thompson signed all the necessary documents. Of course, if someone wants to pay off the debt on his behalf. Ethan understood the game. Ryan had orchestrated everything. To force him to spend his money saving the ranch, leaving him without resources to flee with Isabella. It was a calculated, cruel move, but efficient. How much? Asked Ethan. 60,000 with today's interest, replied the collector. No, said Isabella, holding Ethan's arm. We won't fall into this trap. He'll continue blackmailing us forever. But your father? My father created this situation, and I'll solve it my way. Isabella approached Ryan, her eyes blazing. You want the ranch? You can have it, but you have to accept a challenge. Ryan laughed. What challenge, my dear? If you can tame Shadow, you take the ranch, and the debts are settled. If you can't, you leave forever and leave my family in peace. Isabella, no, murmured Ethan, understanding the danger. "And if I accept and manage to tame the horse?" asked Ryan, interested. "Then you win everything. The ranch, the debt's settled, and you'll never bother us again." Ryan looked at Shadow, who was in the nearby corral, magnificent and wild as always. "And if I can't?" "Then you pay my father's debts and never come back here." "Interesting," said Ryan, "but I'll raise the stakes. If I manage to tame the horse besides the ranch, I want you." "Ryan, this is madness," protested Ethan. "I accept," said Isabella, before Ethan could stop her. "But when you lose, besides paying the debts, you'll transfer to my father all the properties you stole from other ranchers with this same scheme." "Isabella, you don't know what you're doing," whispered Ethan. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she replied, without taking her eyes off Ryan. "I'm betting on the nature of men. Some dominate by force, others by patience, some by malice, others by love." Ryan extended his hand. "We have a deal." The men gathered around the corral where Shadow waited. The horse seemed to sense the tension in the air, snorting and nervously stamping his hooves. Ryan took off his jacket and grabbed a rope, confident. "This will be easy," he muttered to Ethan. "I've tamed dozens of horses." But when Ryan entered the corral, Shadow exploded in fury. It was as if the horse recognized the evil in that man, the violence he carried inside. Ryan tried to use force, shouted commands, whipped the air, but Shadow became wilder with each attempt. In 15 minutes, Ryan was on the ground, with torn clothes and blood flowing from scratches. Shadow rose above him, his front hooves in the air, ready for the final blow. "Stop!" shouted Ryan. "Get this demon away from me." Isabella calmly entered the corral, and Shadow immediately calmed down. She touched the horse's muzzle, whispered loving words, and the animal completely quieted. "You lost," she said to Ryan, who was being helped to his feet. "Now fulfill your part of the deal." Ryan, humiliated and injured, signed the papers that settled Jack's debts. Before leaving, he looked at Ethan with hatred. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," replied Ethan, embracing Isabella, "because now we have power over you. Anything you do against our family, and the whole world will know how you lost to a country." Girl and a horse. When the cars departed, raising red dust, Jack approached his daughter, his eyes wet. "Isabella, I'm sorry for everything, for the bet, for the debts, for being such a bad father." "Dad," she said, hugging her father for the first time in years, "you can change. We can start over. All of us." Ethan approached, touching Jack's shoulder. "Mr. Thompson, I'd like to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage, the right way this time." Jack looked at the man who had tamed Shadow, who had won his daughter without violence, who had faced dangers to protect her. "She's free to choose. She always has been. I was just too stupid to realize it." Isabella smiled, holding Ethan's hands. "Then I choose you, forever." Shadow neighed in the distance as if celebrating the victory, and for the first time since Sarah had died, Sunrise Ranch once again had the sound of happiness echoing through the hills. 6 months later, Sunrise Ranch had transformed completely. Jack, sober for 4 months, worked alongside Ethan in renovating the facilities. The relationship between father and daughter was still being rebuilt, but there was a new peace between them, based on mutual respect and understanding. Ethan had given up on the property in Wyoming, deciding that his place was here, where everything had begun. He invested in the ranch, modernized the equipment, and together they created a pioneering project of therapy with horses for traumatized children. Shadow, now gentle and confident, had become the symbol of the project, showing that even the most wounded creatures could be healed with patience and love. The main house had also changed. The old curtains had been replaced with lighter ones that let the sunlight freely enter. Sarah's portrait was placed in a place of honor in the living room, and every morning Isabella placed fresh flowers before it, thanking her mother for the wisdom she continued to whisper in her dreams. Mrs. Betty had taken charge of the expanded kitchen, which now served not only the family, but also the volunteers and visitors who came to learn about the project. The ranch had become a place of hope, where stories of overcoming were written daily. Isabella and Ethan married in a simple ceremony, under the golden oak tree where Sarah was buried. She wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved by Mrs. Betty, and Ethan wore a simple suit, without the ostentation of his businessman days. The ceremony was small, with only the closest friends, but loaded with meaning. During the exchange of vows, Isabella spoke with a firm and clear voice. "You taught me that taming isn't about restraining, it's about liberating. You taught me that true love isn't possession, it's choice. I choose you today, I choose you tomorrow, I choose you forever." Ethan, with tears in his eyes, replied, "You taught me that strength can be gentle, that courage can be soft. You taught me that a man can be powerful without being violent, that he can be a leader without being domineering. I love you not for what you gave me, but for what you taught me to be." When they kissed, sealing the union, Shadow neighed in the distance, as if celebrating, and everyone laughed, because they knew that Horse had been the unlikely Cupid that had united them. The honeymoon was spent on the ranch itself, because they didn't want to be anywhere else. They spent entire nights talking about the future, about the children they wanted to have, about the legacy they wanted to leave. Ethan had discovered that true wealth wasn't in bank numbers, but in waking up every day next to the woman he loved, in working for something meaningful, in being part of a community that cared for one another. Isabella, in turn, had discovered that she could be strong and delicate at the same time, that she could lead and surrender, that love didn't diminish her independence but expanded it. With Ethan, she had become more herself, not less. A year after the wedding, Isabella gave birth to twins, Sarah and Michael. The girl had her father's amber eyes and her mother's determined temperament. The boy had inherited his mother's brown hair and his father's gentleness. Jack, now a grandfather, discovered a tenderness he thought he had lost forever and became the most dedicated caretaker of the children. Ryan never appeared in the region again. They learned, through acquaintances, that he had lost several businesses and moved abroad. Sometimes Ethan still dreamed of him, but Isabella calmed him, reminding him that the past could no longer hurt them. One Sunday afternoon, 2 years, after the wedding, Isabella was sitting on the porch of the main house nursing Sarah, while Michael played on his grandfather's lap. Ethan approached, coming from the corral, with that smile that still made her heart race. "Shadow is teaching the colts to trust humans," he said, sitting beside her. "It's amazing how he's changed." "We've all changed," replied Isabella, resting her head on his shoulder. "You, me, Dad, even Shadow. Sometimes I think that's what love is, giving people the chance to become the best version of themselves." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "Your mother would be proud." "She is proud," said Isabella with certainty. "I can feel it, especially when I see you with the children, when I see how you treat Dad, when I see the wonderful man you've become. I only became this man because you showed me the way." "No," she corrected, looking into the amber eyes she loved so much. "You always were this man. You just needed someone who believed it." That night, after the children were asleep and Jack had retired, Isabella and Ethan walked to Sarah's grave. The full moon illuminated the golden oak tree, and the gentle breeze made the leaves dance as if they were whispering approval. "Thank you, Mom,"